Welcome to Search for Signs. My name is Gary Willing. If this information interests you, please press the like and subscribe button and press the bell for notifications. Someone once wrote that if fascism ever came to the United States, it would wrap itself in an American flag carrying a cross. And right after 9/11, this tape found me. I can't remember exactly how I got it, but I think I was doing a outreach. I was at an outreach booth with Share International and doing some expo or something like this, and some guy, we were talking, and he went out to his car and gave me the tape. I think that's how I got it. But it was a tape of a Christian minister from like Ohio or Pennsylvania or something like this. And this guy, his theory was that you could tell whether a country was moving toward fascism or had already become a fascist state if it qualified with these different points, right? And I can't remember exactly how many of the words, maybe 7 or 10 or something like that. You know, one of them was, that I remember, was they had to have an enemy, right? Well, if you look at Nazi Germany, right? Well, the enemy, of course, was the Jew, right? They had you have to have a strong, almost exaggerated sense of nationalism, right? And of course, in Germany, you know, they thought they were the master race and so forth, right? And the other one was nepotism. I remember that one, right? I mean, how many members of the Trump family are working in key positions in the White House, right? I mean, it's just, so there you go, right? The other one was they would use the religion of the people against them to gain power, right? And the Nazis did it, right? And other dictators do it and so forth, and they create this kind of, religious state in a lot of ways. And I've always thought that, looking at it historically, I've always thought that there's been elements of fascism in the United States, right? I mean, just what we did to the indigenous people at the time and, the Native Americans and marching them off their land into the reservations, there's an element of fascism to that, right? Slavery, of course, right? And, how they treated these people as subhuman, like they weren't even human, right? Element of fascism, right? And, up all the way to today, right? I mean, there's a lot of improvements in civil rights, but it's still not perfect, right? There's still a lot of inequality, right? But I mean, there's some, it's gotten better. I mean, I can't say no, but at the same time, it's not, right? Now, politically and religiously, I think there's elements of fascism in both those areas, right? I mean, look at the Catholic Church. I mean, you have to listen to what the Pope says, or you'll go to hell, that kind of stuff, right? So, fascism. And then if you look at what happened over the last 30 or 40 years in the United States, right, where there was a separation of church and state, where, and it was a pretty clear, right, definition, separation. You could be a Democrat and go to church and everything was cool, and, you could believe in those kind of things. You could also be a Republican, and that was fine too, and you just go to church, right? I mean, it is what it is. And then something happened, and I don't know exactly when the timing of it was, but it was real sinister and real slick. But all of a sudden, the Republicans kind of took over the Christian churches in this country, and vice versa. The Christian churches kind of took over the Republican Party. And so the Republican Party is viewed by most fundamentalist Christians as the party of the Christ. Therefore, if you aren't a Republican, you are against Christ. I mean, if you look at it, that's what they're thinking, right? And that's what they are saying. And I know there's a prominent, I won't mention his name, but there's a prominent pastor here in Atlanta. And you see pictures of him historically, and he's standing right next to former presidents and so forth. And guess what? Party they were? Republican, right? He wasn't standing next to any Democratic president, right? And they kind of insinuate a lot of times in their preaching, right, about the Republicans. They don't come out and say it because they can't, right, legally, but they can touch on it here or there, and use it for their own political gain and so forth. But there's just this mesh of the two, and so the enemy is the liberal, right? And they're the reason why we're having these problems today. There's liberal media, it's the liberal this, it's the liberal that, or it's the terrorists. They're the reason why we're having these problems. We have an enemy in this country. The United States has always had an enemy, so therefore it's always had an element of fascism. Right? It's never really been a true democracy, ever. I don't think so, right? And so, you look at it today, right? I mean, even with Donald Trump, being president, right? He calls the media, or fake news, right, is what he says, right? Well, I mean, there's other ways of saying it to get his point across. Do I think that everything that the media says is 100% unbiased and true? No, of course not. But I don't think that it's fake. You know what I'm saying? You know, when a president says that it's fake news, in a lot of people's minds, it discredits the media. Just what the Nazis did back in Germany, right? And so, it's a little side note of this historically, right? I mean, the Germans thought they were a master race, and they came up with this, and I use this in quotation, came up with, but this measurement of people's faces to be able to tell what what their racial DNA is, basically based on their facial measurements, right? The distance between their eyes, their nose lengths, and so forth. So they could tell, according to, this is Nazism, right? But they could tell if somebody was Jewish based on their facial, measurements and so forth, right? Or if they were pure Aryan blood or whatever, right? Based on their facial measurements. Well, there was a small little news magazine, right, in Germany, right, that was very brave, not the brightest people out there, but they actually had on the cover one month or a week or whatever it was, according to the measurements that the Nazis came up with, Hitler is a Mongol, right? So that was their headline, right? Well, they're no longer with us. I hate to laugh about it, but I mean, you either laugh or you cry. But yeah, they took care of, the Nazis took care of that problem right away, right? And so, but yet, look at what our president's doing today to the media, calling them fake news. He's discrediting the media, right? Trying to get it to where people don't believe what the free press is saying, so he can kind of do whatever he wants to do, right? Now, I think fascism in and of itself in this country was at its height when George W. Bush took power. I don't think George W. Bush was elected. I think they took the power, they seized the power, whether you want to say they stole the election or whatever, that's up to you, right? Now, the Antichrist energy, and it's an energy, it's not a person. So people looking for Maitreya to be the Antichrist, even if Maitreya is not the Christ or whatever, he's not the Antichrist, because the Antichrist is an energy. And it's an energy that was sent out specifically to destroy the old ways of thinking. But it was an energy that manifested itself very strongly in the Nazis of Germany, right? Especially Hitler. A little less in the fascists in Italy, and a little less in the militarists in Japan. So those 3 points became points of darkness in manifesting that energy. And then the Allies were a triangle too, right? You had England, you had Russia, and you had the United States. They were the ally, they were the forces of light. Now, were they 100% pure? No, but they were a heck of a lot better than the forces of darkness, right? But, and scientifically, esoterically, the triangle creates a power structure. You can't just do it with one, you have to have 3. And so it's a science of shapes, really, is what it is. And the forces of darkness know that too. That's why they had 3. And so what happened was, according to the masters, is the Axis powers and the forces of darkness were defeated, but they weren't destroyed. They weren't sealed off to their own domain. So they still had influence on humanity, is basically what happened, right after World War II. And it started back up when the United States, unfortunately, and the Allied powers created the State of Israel. So when I see bumper stickers on people's cars, I stand with Israel, I stand with this, they don't really, hate to say, know what they're talking about, but it was an evil that was created at that time. They used the religion of the Old Testament or the New Testament against the people. They used it specifically. The forces of darkness did, to create that. And the end result of that has been nothing but violence and instability since. So a tree is known by its fruit, right? They did the exact same thing to the Palestinians that the Germans did to the Jewish people in World War II. They did the exact same thing to the Palestinians that the United States did to the Indians and the Native Americans, when they took all the land in North America, right? It's the exact same thing. It's an evil, right? But it allowed those darkness, that forces of darkness, to kind of come back to life. Not quite as strong as it was during World War II, but still pretty powerful. One is in the Pentagon. The other one is in Eastern Europe around Yugoslavia, and then the third one, which is the more powerful one, actually, is the Zionist in Israel. And what they are doing to the Palestinians today, again, is exactly what the Nazis did to the Jewish people, right? These forces of darkness don't care who they're doing it to. They're just going to do it to whoever. So it's like, and they use that type of thinking. Well, if they did it to me, I can do it to them, or vice versa. I can do it, against those people. The United States does that all the time, right? Well, somebody perpetrates violence on us. Well, let's go perpetrate violence on them, right? I mean, it's an evil that does that. And so, but according to Benjamin Creme, every president since the founding of the Pentagon has been influenced by that force, of that point of darkness to some degree. And I think it was really, really, really strong under the Bush administration, the George W. Bush's administration. But it's still, you can still see elements of it today, even in the Trump administration. Now, the only reason I think that fascism can even be remotely close to existing in the United States is because the people are dead asleep and have been dead asleep for a while of this country. Now, what's going to wake them up? Well, according to the masters in Maitreya, what's going to wake up the people more than anything is an economic crash. And it was very close to almost doing its job 10 years ago. But yet, it didn't go fully down, right? I think that we're headed toward that very soon if we just but realized it. Right now everything's kind of okie dokie, right? The stock market is at its highest of the highs that it's been ever. I mean, record highs for a long time, right? 27,000 points, I think, the last time I saw it. But yet, at the same time, there's just talk about going to negative interest rates in this country. So they obviously know that it's not, we're not doing super great, but they're doing this to try to avoid another stock market crash like 10 years ago or worse, So that, according to Maitreya, is really the only thing that's going to wake this country up. Now, the other thing, too, is that, according to Benjamin Creme's own master, all the people in the world are going to be the ones for change. Unfortunately, the people of the United States are going to be the last to kind of come around. And so you can kind of see it if you live in the United States. I don't know if you're listening to this and you're from the United States, but if you live here, especially in the South, you'd know it's probably true, right? Because just how separate and dead asleep everybody is. But there are elements of fascism in this country. It's really frightening in a lot of ways. But it's going to take the people power to remove the fascist regime that we're living in. It's going to take the people power to stop listening to and being manipulated by this force of darkness. It's going to take that type of movement, right? But it can't be a billion individuals doing it. It's got to be one voice with a billion souls behind it, so to speak. And Maitreya is that synthesizing voice that is going to not only galvanize the people, but articulate it a lot better than I can, the need and and what's important, right? And Maitreya will tell you the first thing we got to do, the very, very, very first thing we have to do is we have to end hunger in this world. We have to do that immediately. That is crucial. And the only way to do that is to take all the food that's rotting over in the West and give it to the East, people in the developing worlds, right? And the good news is we already got all the trucks and trains and helicopters and boats and whatever it's got to do to schlep that food over there. We have to be able to do that, and because we have all that stuff in place to be able to do it. So that's one. That's the very, very first thing. And that will start to bring about justice in the world, where everybody's then kind of feeling fulfilled, right? Which will eventually start to bring about goodwill, right? But eventually, like I said, it's going to be the people that make the changes. The governments, might as well just write them off as not even, as persona non grata, right? And if you expect them to do all the work for you, You're going to be waiting a long, 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 long time for that. Probably as long as you will be waiting for the Falcons to win the Super Bowl. I'm just kidding. But anyway, I hope this helps. And anyway, we'll talk about this soon. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.